Hey guys, it's Baron with OneChiropractic again, and Dr. Richard Barwell continuing our series on neurologically based chiropractic. So, last time we talked about really where the vertebral subluxation fits and the definition of what that means. And we left off on, and I know it's hard for you to stop talking, Doc, because this is your favorite part, and I get it. But we started talking about really, okay, so let's talk about how this actually affects the brain and really the anatomy side of this, and really why what's happening is neurological. And so I want to pick right back up with that and make sure that you get plenty of time to be able to share this exciting information. So I'm going to hand it back over to you. Talk to me about the prefrontal cortex.
Super. Like I said before in the last one, really we're going to look at how stress really does change the brain pattern. And you need to understand this to understand how the power of the adjustment helps to reset it. Because it's multi-leveled and it's just fascinating. The more you dig into this, the more you start to recognize how powerful the adjustment truly is. Matter of fact, when I finally realized how powerful it was, it scared the heck out of me. And I was wondering what the heck I'd been doing to my patients through the years when I was just pounding things away. But that's what I was taught. And it worked, but there was times it didn't work. And I wanted to know exactly why. Well, it comes down to a lot of this, understanding how the stress affects the brain. So the prefrontal cortex is really an important area. It makes us humans human. We have this area that nobody else has got. And the prefrontal cortex is considered to be the orchestra leader of the brain. It sets the tone for the rest of the brain. But here's the thing. It's the highest order of cognitive ability. It's about our ability to think. It's about our ability to project, to see the future, to be able to say, if I do this, this, and this, I should get this. Other animals don't have this. We are the only ones that have this ability, but it is extremely sensitive to even mild acute stress. Even one event can throw the prefrontal cortex out of whack. And when you throw the orchestra leader out of whack, you can imagine what it's going to sound like in an orchestra if the orchestra leader can't keep the beat. So that's really an important part to us take a look at how the stress area starts to build. There's a direct connection between the prefrontal cortex and the cerebellum, and we're going to get into that today because I'm going to be able to show you how the vertebral subluxation is actually created by stressors, the part that we've been missing for 100 years. Self-regulation of the brain is dependent on the prefrontal cortex control over established cortical patterns. Your brain consists of a cortex. The cortex is a bunch of neurons, billions of neurons that are interwired to set up patterns based on your experiences. So you learn a lesson about putting your hand on a hot pot. It gets wired into your cortex to say, don't do that again. If somebody says it's hot, you know that that's going to hurt. That's a hardwired pattern in your cortex. Okay, and the prefrontal cortex establishes control over this. Self-regulation failure in the brain occurs when the processing resources of the brain become overwhelmed. This is an important statement. When the processing resources of the brain become overwhelmed. If you have a computer and you load it up with more stuff that it can handle, it's going to start malfunctioning. The brain is no different. It gets up to a point where it has limited amount of processing resources, and when the stressors reach that level, tolerance is level, and the only way that the brain can then tell you that it's got a problem is to create a sign or symptom that becomes registered in the conscious mind. The problem started long before it got there. But even minor lapses in self-control can snowball into self-regulation collapse. If it keeps going with the collapse, you end up, and I have to agree with Dr. Michael Longyear when he talked about PTSD. He said there's nothing post about it. It's real and it's lifetime.
Yeah.
Can we go to the next one? I want to show you how this works. There's the prefrontal cortex. I love my prefrontal cortex. Reality testing and error monitoring goes on in the prefrontal cortex. Top-down guidance of attention and thought. It's paying attention to what's going on. My prefrontal cortex is lit up like a Christmas tree right now because I have to keep thinking ahead and I have to be able to put stuff together. I have to be able to use my logic. Inhibition of inappropriate actions, little funny word spelling there. Appropriate. inhibition of inappropriate action. So it slows down inappropriate activities. It says, shut your mouth. It's time. Don't make that statement. That's not appropriate. That all comes from the prefrontal cortex. When that's not working right, we have some problems. Emotional regulation. Temper tantrums, crying all the time. That all starts with the prefrontal cortex being able to handle it, and it deals with the rest of the brain, the hypothalamus, the amygdala. We're going to go into all of this stuff in detail later on in the series and talk about stressors and that, and talk about how chiropractic affects that and it can improve that. So also, if you'll notice, it says norepinephrine and dopamine regulation by the prefrontal cortex. We hear about this stuff a lot. That's under that control. Now, flip the slide and we'll take a look at what happens here. This is scary. Even mild acute stress can throw the prefrontal cortex into chaos, and you lose prefrontal cortex regulation. Now your emotional responses aren't there. You're going to start making inappropriate statements and doing inappropriate actions. Compulsive behavior is going to take over. Your norepinephrine and dopamine levels are going to get messed up. This thing starts to screw everything up. So how we think, how we feel, how we react to what's going on in our environment is all controlled by that prefrontal cortex and the effect of stress that it has on that. It's an amazing area. If you have followed Dr. Heidi Habig's work, I kind of have I consider her my granddaughter. I am in love with this girl. Boy, she is something else. And the research that she has done and what she has shown for chiropractic is unlike anything we've ever seen. And she shows that the adjustment directly improves prefrontal cortex regulation. You don't need to know anything more.
That's right.
I mean, if you want to draw the line there, you can draw the line there. I think you'd make a mistake, because the more you look into it, the more exciting it becomes. You want to move to another slide? This is the part that really starts to make sense. And listen, I started out as a chiropractor that was all about vertebral subluxation and nerve root pressure. That's what I was taught. Mm-hmm. And I'm an old guy, but I learned new things because I kept asking why. And the more I asked why, the more I learned. And when I learned the stuff, man, I had to let go of what I was taught and what I did before, because what I was learning had more value. And you can't be afraid to let stuff go. You've got to be able to move on, because you can offer your patients so much more than just saying, how's the back pain today, Mrs. Brown? Oh, you're feeling better? Oh, that's good. So the cerebellum is 10% by volume of the brain, but 50% of the neurons in the brain are located in the cerebellum. That alone should say, whoa, wait a minute, there's something going on in this area of the brain that's obviously really, really important. 80% of sensory input is through the eyes. That's why when we do testing, we are wanting to know eyes open, eyes closed. The cerebellum, here it is, orients the body in space. It tells where we are in space. The next line, really important. It responds to the pull of gravity. It's what keeps us upright. If you have some problems going on with the cerebellum, you're going to have problems orienting the body in space and responding ideally to the pull of gravity. It does this by coordinating the fine-tuned movements of balance and proprioception. Well, where do we find proprioception? In the joints. So all of a sudden, movement proprioception is really important, because a lot of information is coming into the cerebellum to keep us standing upright. Has anybody ever recognized the fact that if you don't feel good, you don't want to be standing up all the time? You want to sit down, and finally, if you get so sick you can't stand up anymore, you have to lie down, because the cerebellum says, I cannot keep you going. It's overloading my thresholds. You're fighting off a disease or an illness or an injury, and guess what? It says, nope, I need to get you down. I need to stop you. So here's what happens. We get a stressor, goes to the prefrontal cortex, connects directly with the cerebellum. Matter of fact, it's getting it at the same time. The cerebellum's getting it at the same time the prefrontal cortex is. And the cerebellum goes, whoa, this is not good. There's something going on out there. I need to pay attention. And if it starts to become overwhelmed, you lose your ability to stay perfectly balanced. Well, if you don't stay perfectly balanced, the semicircular canals say, hey, I don't like this over at this angle. I'm going to pull you back the other way, and it'll start changing the coordination of the fine-tuned movements of balance and proprioception. And guess where the highest level of that is? In the spinal column and spinal joints. And so guess what? It's going to cause a vertebral subluxation. Boom. There it is. That's to drop the mic and walk out. It causes the vertebral subluxation. That's how stress does this. So do we just now leave that vertebral subluxation? Does that have an interference? Absolutely. Now the system has to work even more overtime because that segment's not moving the way it's supposed to. Okay, you can just run this one down because most of it's the same information. It plays a role in fight-flight. If you're not feeling great and your balance isn't right, the brain says, the danger, I cannot defend myself properly. So now it puts it more into sympathetic and fight-flight mode. Cerebellum is really important for well-being and safety. Meditation or loving kindly puts the cerebellum at peace, and that increases the parasympathetic response to turn off the fight-flight stimulation. When we get an adjustment and it starts to be able to balance itself better and it moves the system out of fight-flight, guess what? We start to get into the healing mode.
Right.
So good sleep, REM sleep, turns off the cerebellum guard duty. This is all such critical information, and now the mystery is out. Now we know why the vertebral subluxation is created. What the adjustment does from here is even more exciting.
Yeah, that's just insane to me, right? Because, you know, as I'm listening to that, which I've heard you teach this probably 4 or 5 times now, but it still blows my mind how complicated we feel like we have to make this when it all just kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's really just a manner of understanding how the brain actually communicates with the rest of the body, what part of the brain does that, and what affects that part of the brain. And if we stop trying to make this so dang complicated, because if you think about it, justifying bone on nerve is a heck of a lot harder than justifying what you just went through, right? I mean, it really is.
It is. It truly is. And especially, you know, if you're doing the old put your finger in there and I'm going to pinch your finger, you see that? You know, if you have somebody that has any kind of anatomical understanding, they're going to challenge you and you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
You're not dead in the water with this. You're in the up-to-date latest stuff.
Yeah. All right, so let's review. We've covered a lot over the last couple of sessions. So go ahead and kind of just give us this summary of what we've gone through to this point.
Well, first thing is, I hope you now understand that there's a process behind the creation of the vertebral subluxation. We all knew that. But we ignored it. Well, you can't ignore that. You have to pay attention to that because that's the justification for the vertebral subluxation in existence, period. Let alone the bone on nerve, that does exist. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. The vertebral subluxation plays a very important role in the return to normal neurological function. So bones, joints, and muscles are not the cause of the problem. So we can't go back and say that vertebral subluxation is the cause of all illness and disease. Not true. We need to stop saying that because when we say that, we just look silly. Okay? Stress is the cause of all illness. That's well established now. There's been so many books and so much information on this, and it's coming out at a high rate. That's our business. Our business is not so much stress management, but undoing the damage of stress that happens every day of our life. Never ends. The only time it stops is with death. Okay? There's a direct relationship between stress, neuroregulation, and the inflammatory process, which is the foundation for disease and illness. Stressors overwhelm the central nervous system's ability to integrate sensory input and respond ideally. That's the key. And the cerebellum's ability to respond to gravity is affected by stress, which is the foundation for the physical vertebral subluxation.
Awesome.
Simple points.
Absolutely great stuff, man. So, you know, I'm excited because of where we're at. Now,
look at the grin.
yeah. You know, it's like, okay, we're getting some of this foundational stuff that's absolutely necessary to make the light bulb go on and should make you say, oh, wow, like, okay, give me more. And I hope that's your response watching this thing, because there's so much more coming at you now that we're getting into really understanding the adjustment itself, and how that actually communicates and regulates with the body. So, man, I'm super excited about this. So again, I'm going to keep saying at the end of every session, we need more people watching this. Every time we talk and we dig deeper in this rabbit hole, it should get you a little bit more excited, should make you scratch your head and be like, dude, I got someone else that needs to hear this. And just send them the link to start the series over. There's a reason we're not charging for this, because we want it out there. So there's no hidden secret here. We're not going to start blasting you and marketing you. That's not what One Chiropractic is about. And so we want this just out there. We want it to go viral. So please continue to send the link so people can start from the beginning. Hopefully you're finding this convenient. It's not eating up too much of your day, and it's giving you this stuff in bite-sized pallets so that you can start to absorb the information. But we love and appreciate you, Dr. Barwell, as always. Thank you so much. And I look forward to digging into the next section. We'll see you guys in a day.